Alright, today we'll be showing you how to install your Unichip on a Toyota Vios 1.3 dual VVTi. Actually 1.3 and 1.5, the computer box is the same, so it's the same process. We'll show you which wires go to where and where exactly is it installed and how does Unichip work. But let's get the first thing out of the way. As of now, this is 2021 August. Yeah. Vios cannot be reflashed as far as the Philippine Vios goes. From what we know, everything 2015 and onwards still cannot be reflashed because there. So as you can see, our ECU is made in the Philippines. That's the reason why we can't reflash the Vios. So yes, the local Vios in the Philippines has the ECU made in the Philippines. And the reason why we can't reflash is because Toyotas work a little bit differently from every other car that is able to reflash. Normally what happens is if the ECU here, this goes to the laptop here, usually through the OBD port, so that's the OBD port right there. This OBD port is a two-way street, meaning that you can read, you can write. So that's why it's called also reflash, because the computer treats your ECU as a flash drive. So this is read, this is write. Toyotas work a bit differently. You can only write. You cannot read. So the question now becomes, how in the world do you reflash the file inside the ECU if you don't have the file to begin with? Well, that's where the worldwide network of ECU hackers and crackers come into play. Ideally, in other countries, you should be able to request the original file of your ECU because it's part of the car when you buy it. For some unknown fucking reason, Toyota Philippines don't want to do it here. So it's in a format called .cuw. And this is the file that we get from the Toyota TEC software. So anyway, other countries can do it, we can't. Because they're pricks. So once you have that .cuw file, this is now converted into bin or binary format. You computer science people should know what binary means. This is now, once we have this file, then this one can be edited. But like I said, since we don't have this one, so we can't edit it. And apparently, yeah, there's no way to get it. I've tried. Really, I've tried. I've talked to Toyota dealers, I've talked to the plant, everything. Everybody says no, it cannot be done. Oh well, hindi. So that's why Toyotas cannot be reflashed, or the Vios per se cannot be reflashed. And the reason why that is, unlike the Fortuner, Innova, and Hilux, or the more popular Toyota cars, their ECUs are made in either Japan or Thailand, where they have access to the files from the dealership. Here's the thing. The guys who make the reflash software, so this is the reflash software people. When they crack and hack the ECU, they don't sell it to the end user like you. No, that's not their market. What they do is they sell it to people like me. Tuning shop that must have a dyno, must know how to tune, must know how to reflash, must know how to remap, must know how to modify. Only then do we sell it to you, the end customer. So as you can imagine, with a made in the Philippines ECU, these guys will spend a lot of time and effort cracking a Philippine-made ECU to have exactly one customer, me. So it's not worth it for them to do. Because you have to understand, if you sell 10,000 Vioses in the country, maybe maybe 10% of that 10,000 are the modifying kind. So by modification, we mean body kit, spoiler, wheels, etc., etc., etc. So 10% of 10,000 is 1,000. And then we all know forma is more important than performance. So probably another 10%, now too big, maybe 5% of that 1,000 is interested in performance. So that leaves me with 50 people. Now you see why it's too small a market for these guys to care. That is why we have Unichip. Which is the only thing that can tune the Vios, single VVTi, dual VVTi, etc., etc. We can also tune the Rush with that, we can also tune the Camry with that, we can tune the Avanza, the Wigo, and every other thing that doesn't have a reflash around. So this is why we have Unichip. So we have a solution for pretty much any car that you have. So it's either to ECU remap or Unichip. As far as power goes, there is pretty much no difference between Unichip and remap when it comes to the Vios. Unichip will give you 13 to 15 horses. Remap will also give you 13 to 15 horses. No difference at all. Because for gasoline cars, you are hitting a certain range of air-fuel ratio. It doesn't really matter how that's achieved, either through Unichip or remap. If it's happy in this range, so say 13.5 to about 12.5, it will make the same amount of power if it hits this air-fuel ratio. It doesn't mean that remap will give you more power. No, it doesn't work that way. For diesels, yes. For gasoline, no. All we're dealing with is air-fuel ratio here and ignition timing. Which Unichip can adjust, remap is adjusting exactly the same thing. So one is not more powerful than the other. So let's go and see exactly what the Unichip is and what the 8 wires are for. So this is our Unichip. The latest one is apparently Unichip X now. For the last 7, 8 or so years, it's been the Unichip Q and the Unichip Q4. So the new ones are now the X and the X Plus. Functionally, they function exactly the same. So it's just like saying that you have an iPhone 8 and an iPhone 8s. Functionally, it's the same. Faster processor inside, but it doesn't really matter that much. So as far as you, the customer, is concerned, it doesn't matter which Unichip you get. They both work exactly the same. So nothing to fuss about. This is the harness that comes with the Unichip. The wires here we insert depending on what car it is, and it's about 8 wires. So 2, 4, 6, 7 wires. Okay, this plugs in here. Like that. And this part here gets wired to the wiring harness of the car, not the ECU itself. Let's make a very important distinction. So let's assume that, okay, let's say this is your car's ECU over here. Unichip wired, then this is the wiring harness of the car. That plug, big socket with the plugs and with the fat number of wires. So this is the wiring harness. Unichip installs here. So that's how it is. We don't open up the ECU does not change. We don't break it open, we don't solder stuff inside. No, everything is just here on the wiring harness. And it is reversible because it's all just soldering and heat shrink wrap. So anytime we want to put it back to stock, we just simply unsolder all of this and then resolder the connections here, and it goes back to stock. Once that happens, once Unichip is out, car goes back to stock because now it's communicating with a stock ECU. So what these 7 wires do are, we have the first 2 here. This is power and ground. These 2 go either to the mass airflow sensor or the map sensor or whatever airflow device is inside the car. This one gets tapped to the crank sensor, so this one adjusts ignition timing, and this one goes to our throttle signal. So basically how throttle position sensor. Now remember what I said when Unichip adjusts air fuel ratio and ignition timing. This is how it's done. Air fuel ratio is pretty much controlled by your mass airflow sensor or MAP sensor. On the Vios, it's a mass airflow. So air goes in here. This senses how much airflow goes in, adjusts fueling accordingly. So this works on 0 to 5 volts. But realistically, the operating range is about 1 to 4 volts. Because 0 volts is patay, naka-off. 5 volts is the maximum, so you don't go to the maximum voltage. So let's assume that 1.5 volts equals 100 air. Raising the voltage to 1.7 volts will give you 120 air. And this will correspond to, say, 10 fuel. This will correspond to 12 fuel. So what we alter is the voltage signal here. What happens is, so how this operates is like this. Air goes in here, there's a voltage that goes out here, that goes to the ECU, and this ECU throws out a signal to the injector, which squirts out the fuel. Make the voltage higher, more fuel. Make the voltage lower, less fuel. So this is how we control air fuel ratio. Ignition timings exactly the same way. This is a crank sensor, so you can have plus and minus, which is advance and retard. So this one now sends a signal to the spark plug. Well, ignition coil per se, not the spark plug. So you advance the degree that the sensor senses, you advance the spark plug timing, which means it fires earlier. You retard it, so spark plug fires later. Same thing. It's a feedback loop basically. So what Unichip does is, once you wire it in, so let's go back to this one. You have air going in here, 1.5 volts. Goes into the Unichip, then Unichip throws out 1.7 volts, thereby increasing the fuel. Same thing with your crank sensor. It's also voltage based. So let's say it throws in 2 volts. Goes into the Unichip, modifies it, throws out 2.5 volts. Making the spark plug effectively have that advanced type. This is basically how an engine works. You have air. Well, the air is 1.3 liters. There's nothing you can do. You have fuel and you have spark. Any engine in the entire earth works on these 3 principles: air, fuel, and spark. Whether it's a Ferrari, Lamborghini, tractor, Toyota, Mitsubishi, you need air, fuel, and spark. And this is how Unichip does it. Okay, for those of you who have watched my videos on tuning and remapping, this is the Unichip screen, and pretty much it's the same. You have RPM and you have load here. The values here are 0 zeros because it starts off as nothing, 0 0. Let's say if I want to add fuel, all I have to do is go here. So I've added 4 fuel. And by the way, this number 4 does not mean anything. It does not mean fuel flow, it does not mean volume, it's just an arbitrary number that says 4. And this is why it's important that when we're tuning cars, we need a dyno. Because if I input this number 4, I need to know what this number 4 translates to into actual horsepower on the car. And by the way, it is highly possible. No, it actually happens that I have 2 exact same cars. I will input the exact same numbers on the Unichip, exact same engine. They will give different results. So let's say on our Vios, I put 4 here, and then we get an additional 5 horsepower. On the next Vios that I do, I put exactly the same number 4. I might get 6 horses. I might get 4 horses. I might get 3 horses. I might get no horses at all. Now you can see why the dyno is important. it is the feedback loop that tells us that what we're doing is correct and what we're doing gives power or not. So if we want to reduce fuel, it's just the opposite. So we go into the minus territory. Once again, these numbers don't mean anything. It's just an arbitrary number. Unlike here on timing, if I do add here, this is in actual units of degrees of rotation. So remember elementary, one circle is 360 degrees. So this one, we're adding 3 degrees of timing. We can even do decimal points. 3.65 degrees of timing. I can do that. So the control for the Unichip is actually pretty precise. Even in the fueling, I can add decimal points of fueling if I want. 3.8. That's actually pretty precise already. And you have to understand, these things are working at hundreds of... Now, you have to understand, your engine's piston goes up and down several hundred times a minute. So it has to be pretty fast and it has to be pretty precise. So let's get started. We'll install the Unichip on the Vios and then we'll do the baseline dyno. Afterwards, we'll tune it, then see how much more power we get. Done with our Vios, and then we have the baseline, and then we have our tune. And I will teach you now how to read a dyno chart, because 10 out of 10 people, when they look at this dyno chart, they will just focus on this number and say, huh? I gained 0.5 horses? Is that correct? I gained 0 power? No, that's not how you read a dyno chart. First things first, you have to understand that horsepower always has to have a time component, meaning that for a car, horsepower always has to have RPM. Even if you look at your brochure, when you buy it, you look at any website out there that has the specs of the car, if it says horsepower, read the rest of it. Say for the Vios, it says 100 horsepower at 6,500 RPM or 6,200 RPM. Horsepower without that RPM is meaningless. The same way that pag kayo nagbilang ng kuryente sa Meralco sa bahay, how do they charge you? Kilowatt per hour. See? It's the same. That's power. So this is how it is. This is how we read it. This green line here is our stock horsepower. So it peaks at 95 horses at 5,800 RPM. That's the only place that that's the only place that 95 horsepower happens. Everywhere else, it's not 95. So here, we start at 1,700 RPM. And it's already at full throttle. Your engine's only making 8 horses. Then as it goes up to 2.5, it makes only 18 horses. Then 23 horses. Then 30. 38. 50. 60. Then it goes up like that. This red line is our tune after Unichip. So let's start again at the low end at 17 RPM. So from 8 horse we get 13 horse. Then it gets bigger. So at 18 horse now it becomes 40 horses. 23, 42, 30, 52, 38, 65. Now you see how horsepower is computed. If you really want to do it mathematically, this is how it's done. You have to get every single point here, get the area of this whole thing, then get the area of this whole thing. Once you minus it, this is what it is. So since I've been doing this for a long time, I can tell you right now, if we just plot out a straight line here and we average it out, you get 12 to 15 horses on average for this entire area here. Same thing with torque. We start out pretty low at 35, then 55, then 50 to 150. This is more than double here at 25 RPM. And then 60 to 95, 70 to 112, so on and so forth. And realistically, how often have you reached 6,000 RPM in your daily drive? 9.9 out of 10 people never reach this RPM because there are still some people who think na they don't take it to red line baka sumabog daw yung makina, which is frankly kind of stupid. The car will not allow you to over-rev, so it's fine to take it to red line. It will not sabog, it will not destroy the car, it will not lessen the life of the engine, it's fine. So for our 1.3 Vios with a Unichip installed, we get an average of 12 to 15 horses more. And drive normally, meaning that don't try to race everybody in the stoplight, but that's what everybody tends to do. Every time they come out here of the shop, what they do is they floor it and make upak agad. They don't normally drive that. So drive normally, you see about 8 to 10% better mileage.